Hi, and welcome to Teaching Tip Tuesday, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning at UWSP. I recently came across a couple of articles in The Teaching Professor by Stephen Chu, a psychology professor at Samford University, about the ways that students and instructors fool themselves about teaching and learning. They really resonated with me, and so I'd like to share some of his insights with you. Over the next 2 weeks, I'll discuss some of the mistakes that both students and instructors make with regard to teaching and learning, and I'll point you toward better practices. Although I won't go into depth here about many of the alternatives, I'll provide references to prior videos in the Teaching Tip Tuesday series that do. Let's start with why students might be fooling themselves about their learning. Here I have no data from the literature, only my personal opinion based on my experiences with students through the years. I think that there are two big processes that explain why students are kidding themselves. First, for many, being smart is part of their identity, and it strikes me that they contort a lot of their perceptions in service of preserving that identity, especially when they first come to college. They often come to exams sure that they're well prepared and that they know a lot. Then, if they don't do well on the exam, they blame the instructor or the unfairness of the test because to accept that the problem might be in their court would jeopardize their identity as being smart. This is one of the challenges with having a fixed mindset. It can't be me, I'm smart. The problem must be something else. Next, our students aren't blank slates. They've had some academic success in the past, and it isn't intuitive to them that there are some stark differences between high school and college. When students have used particular study strategies successfully for years, in their minds, the weight of the evidence has taught them that these strategies work. It's often difficult to get them to critically examine the way that they approach learning. So, what are the ways that Professor Chu and others say students fool themselves? First, students often confuse time spent studying with learning. I studied for hours, so I'm prepared. They seem able to tell you at the drop of a hat how long they spent studying, but time spent studying, while important to learning, is not all that's important to learning. It's been well documented that it's more important what you do to learn than how long you do it. So, what are students doing? They often gravitate toward forms of study that seem easy. Passive learning strategies like highlighting their reading or their notes and rereading the highlighted portions are common. From personal observation, it seems that students also like to use online flashcard decks that have been prepared by others, so they no longer spend as much time processing information to make their own flashcards, preferring just passive review. Spending a lot of time using weak learning strategies produces weak learning. This is complicated by the fact that the passive strategies often favored by students tend to focus on recognition rather than understanding. They produce shallow learning and short-term recall that can fade very quickly. In addition, in many cases, students misperceive the time they've spent studying due to multitasking and distractions in the environment. For study to be effective, it must be focused. One can't focus on learning while one is singing along with Spotify or checking messages or occasionally scrolling through Instagram. Students may perceive that because a study session has lasted 2 hours, they've done 2 hours worth of study, when in reality, they've only been actively engaged with the course for about 15 or 20 minutes, and those minutes have been dispersed over 2 hours in ways that really prevent them from consolidating information into their memory. Students also confuse exposure and availability with learning. We facilitate this by providing PowerPoints, lecture notes, and lecture recordings. Students often listen to lectures without taking notes. Data indicate that these days fewer than half of students spend time taking good notes in lectures. Students assume that they can review the posted PowerPoints at a later time, but again, just listening to lectures and viewing slides are passive learning strategies. When considering how this impacts learning, it's important to note that listening and understanding at the time don't necessarily correlate with remembering or being able to retrieve or apply information, what most instructors would consider learning. Learning requires deeper processing, making connections, and synthesis of information, all of which are part of note-taking. With regard to learning specific skills, passive exposure can never produce lasting learning. After all, if we could just watch somebody do something once and then do it flawlessly ourselves in perpetuity, I'd be a master guitarist. But to gain skill, folks need to practice. The next two sources of confusion are linked. Students often don't distinguish between superficial and deep learning, and they don't distinguish between peer norms and instructor expectations. Students often define learning as the ability to recall something tomorrow. This is the kind of superficial learning that cramming before an exam can provide. It can lead to good grades on assessments, but students often underestimate how quickly this type of learning fades. This is not the type of deep learning that will allow them to recall information months later or apply information in new contexts. Which links us to the next area of confusion. Students are more aware of what their peers are doing to learn and what their peers think good comprehension is than they are about what their instructors expect. They base their ideas about the type and amount of studying necessary to succeed on what those around them are doing, without recognizing that their peers may have different levels of pre-existing proficiency or may be less successful than they perceive. Instructors usually want deeper learning from their students. Their expectation is that students are working to make connections between diverse ideas in their time outside of class and diving deeply into thinking about the meaning, relevance, and applicability of what they're being taught, something peers are often unaware of. So, how can you, as an instructor, get students to stop fooling themselves about learning? You can begin by making sure that your course is well aligned, clearly stating the learning outcomes you want students to achieve, and drawing their attention back all the time to what you expect them to be able to do as part of demonstrating that they've achieved those learning goals goes a long way toward clarifying your expectations. Emphasize the growth mindset in your courses. This can help neutralize their fixed mindsets about their smartness and orient them toward improving their knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Next, be sure to incorporate metacognitive activities as part of your course. When students become more deliberate about evaluating their thinking and the state of their knowledge, comparing where they are with where you want them to end up, they'll become less able to talk themselves into thinking that they're well prepared. Plan your course so that shallow learning, short-term memorization, and mere recognition are not enough to produce a good grade. Consider comprehensive exams and projects that reward deeper learning and long-term recall. Finally, discuss with students ways to optimize learning. I strongly suggest that you make them read the paper Optimizing Learning in College, Tips from Cognitive Psychology by Putnam et al., which is written for students as a means of getting into this topic. This will help them better understand the differences between shallow and deep learning. You can investigate all of these suggestions further using the links posted with this video. If you have any questions or would like help implementing these suggestions in your course, schedule a consultation with CITL designers. Students need help learning how to learn. The choices that you make as an instructor can help them overcome poor training and some of the lax and unproductive learning strategies that they've adopted and improve their understanding of what it means to know something. And that's this week's teaching tip, brought to you by the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning here at UWSP. Remember, at CITL, we offer support for course design, learning activities, assessment, and pedagogy. Visit our website to schedule a consultation today.